you one of those people who believe that there's nothing left to discover in this world of ours? Then here's the story of Lawrence Blair and his brother Lorne, who came east in search of adventure and found themselves wandering for 10 years in the most volcanic region on Earth, into the Ring of Fire.
These are the forgotten waters of the East, where creatures still unknown to science may lurk beneath the surface. There's certainly room enough for them here. The 13,000 islands of Indonesia stretch from mainland Asia across the equator to New Guinea. Old maps would sometimes mark the blank unexplored spaces as "here be dragons." In fact, it was here, early this century, that the myth became reality. We reached the calm of Komodo's Bay after a wild night passage through the currents and riptides that barricade the island from its larger neighbors and isolate the lost world of the Komodo dragon. Well, here we are. I'm Lorne, the bearded one with a monocle. And that's my brother Lawrence, who seems to think he'll make it over 100 yards of coral in his thongs. Urchins? We'd been traveling now through Indonesia for more than a year. Okay. We'd met sultans and snake hunters, pirates and princesses.
Terima kasih, Pak.
Now we were ready for dragons. There's only one village on Komodo, 400 people clinging to the edge of the sea. They're all descended from outcasts who, over the centuries, were banished by the sultans of neighboring Bima to eke out their lives on Dragon Island. It was pretty depressing, and we were eager to head inland. But first, there were the headman's formalities to be faced.
What is our address? No fixed address.
I think that's it. Even the most remote villages in Indonesia can usually produce a guest book.
Explorer. Explorer tourist. Bit of a cop-out.
He told us that only a month before, a dragon had come right into the village and taken a goat.
Ah, di sini. Lihat di sini di kampung. Right in the village. Sulit kalau begitu ya.
Late last century, pearl divers spoke of seeing a huge man-eating reptile on Komodo. Their accounts were dismissed as the wild imaginings of superstitious seamen.
Borassus palms, lollipop trees.
But in these prehistoric hills, in 1911, a Dutch expedition found their stories to be true. In recent years, there have been 7 confirmed cases of people being eaten by the dragons of Komodo. In 1974, a Swiss baron became the first Western victim. The epitaph on his lonely memorial reads, "He loved nature throughout his life." Our enthusiasm for dragon hunting took a dive when we realized how little we really knew about these semi-mythical creatures.
You know they're supposed to be cold-blooded. They're only supposed to move around in the daytime.
Unquestionably, the most pleasing time of day in the hills of Komodo is dawn. You start to see what's been rustling in the bushes. Varanus komodoensis, the Komodo dragon. They can grow to over 11 feet, weighing 250 pounds, 450 with a full belly. Their flickering tongues pick up the scent molecules of their prey, for they're both scavengers and very effective hunters. Fortunately, it was a dead goat they were after. It was even smellier than us. That one's about 9 feet long. They can move fast enough in short bursts to bring down deer, wild horses, and man too if he's not careful.
Very disgusting.
Their layers of serrated teeth carry a deadly bacteria. Even a small bite will soon fester and stink, guiding other dragons to an animal that might have escaped the original attack. They're cannibals, and the smaller ones must be nimble on their toes if they want to grow up. The goat was almost gone, and despite full bellies, they still seemed hungry.
Quick, eager sods. Be a little careful. This guy can give you a bit of a nip.
Now I understood why the dragons had survived so successfully through the ages. There could be no doubt about who ruled this land. We left the village of Komodo to sail south and east across the straits, through some of the world's least dived waters. And what waters! I couldn't keep Lawrence out of them.
I was drawn effortlessly through these mysterious chasms. They are carved by the currents which pour between this thin chain of islands dividing the South China Seas from the Indian Ocean. 2 days south from the main chain, we reached a strange and beautiful island, Sumba. Old charts called it Sandalwood Island for the aromatic forests which once covered these hills. The sandalwood has all gone to provide incense for the temples and churches of the world. But it cleared the way for the sandalwood horse, a unique breed much sought after by colonial cavalry regiments to fight their tropical wars.
Yeah.
In fact, we'd long heard of a battle being fought here once a year, a deadly ritual war sport between armies of mounted warriors. But just when it would take place seemed to be anybody's guess. High above the valley of Wanokaka, on the hilltop sanctuary of Ububewi, we found 3 old priests carefully observing the moon. It was they who would have to decide a month in advance the correct day for the battle. While they watched the sky, we settled into wait at the village of Puli, which overlooks the sacred cove of Nyali, the goddess of the sea. Life in Puli was so pleasant, I didn't mind if the priests never came up with a battle day. One morning, Puli was paid a formal visit by the high priest of the valley. He was the man we'd heard could tell us most about Sumba's ways and beliefs. So a few days later, appropriately dressed, I thought, I took the gift of a live chicken and our questions up to his sanctuary at the far end of the valley. Any social occasion in Sumba calls for the sharing of betel nut. It's a mild narcotic, which definitely alters one's perception, but that's nothing to what it does to one's mouth. It only works if it's chewed with just the right proportions of the pepper flower and powdered mineral lime. The 3 elements turned my mouth into a burning cauldron of saliva. You're supposed to spit it out, but not on yourself. Eventually, it'll destroy your teeth, and then, like the old priest, you must pre-mix the paste to a gummable consistency. I wanted to know what this ritual battle was all about, but they said they'd have to ask the approval of the Marapu gods before they'd even talk to us about it. The answer would be in the entrails of our unfortunate chicken. The omens did not augur well for an interview.
One has seen inside the chicken that, in fact, Marapu gods are jolly angry. And this is not the time, this is not the time or the month.
Okay.
And furthermore, that they wouldn't mind it at all. If we make an offering in the Siripinang plate on our departure.
Hard cash, eh? Yes, understand it can be done.
If the offering was generous enough, they told us, the gods might be persuaded to change their minds. But it struck me as a bad kick-off somehow, being a party to the bribery and corruption of the gods. We decided to look elsewhere for some answers. And there were clues to their past and present standing all around us. In Europe, we haven't raised such megaliths since the days of the Druids. But these are still going up today as they have been since before the time of Christ, for Sumba is a living megalithic culture. And these granite blocks are still hewn and hauled from the sacred quarries, just as they were when this film was shot in the 1920s. They're dragged by brute force for many miles to the burial sites. Important people are entombed beneath them, together with their most valuable possessions. Within living memory, these would include their sacrificed slaves. Sumba has a long tradition of human sacrifice. One day, the priests came down to make offerings to the goddess of the sea. It was their way of announcing that the month of taboo, leading up to the ritual battle, had begun. This would be a sacred place for the whole month, which meant no more fishing or swimming on the goddess's beach. And the high priest made quite sure nobody violated that taboo. We still wanted to find out just what was going to happen and why, but he remained his usual secretive self. Then we met Jago Pana, a famous veteran of the Pasola, the ritual battle we'd come to see. He reminisced about the recent kills in the Pasola.
Dalam kuda kasih bangun kuda lagi, terus bak tabruk di tengah, baru balikin kuda terus tang ingkai. Jadi begitu, jadi terus jatuh memang.
He says the Pasola reflects an eternal conflict between the upper world of the Marapu gods and the lower world of the sea. It's from this conflict that all creation arises. And the task of humans, he says, is to help keep the balance. The entire valley is patterned to reflect this dualism. The Pasola is fought between the inland villages who champion the Marapu gods and those of the coast who champion Nyali, the goddess of the sea. The night before the battle is the most psychically dangerous of the year. All the ancestors and spirits are on the prowl. Only the priests dare venture out, in procession down towards the sea. They reached Puli just before dawn. The symbolic umbilical cord, which had linked the oldest house to the oldest grave, was now untied. The month of taboo was ended. Now the whole valley could go down to the beach, which swarmed on this one dawn a year with an edible sea worm. They see them as a gift from the sea goddess of part of her body. They only swarm this one day a year, the dawn of the Posola battle. So the priests had been watching the stars, I realized, to detect the annual rhythms of their island. Priests of the upper and lower worlds invoked the hidden forces they represented to join in the battle. It's they who would toss the first spears of the Posola. To me, it seemed at first more like a chaotic free-for-all than a ritual. Then I spotted our friend Jago Pana in action. He had told us that everyone present would be at risk that day. Even the spectators were in the hands of the spirits. At least one death was expected, but the spilling of some human blood was essential. Without it, there could be no equilibrium between the unseen forces. I now realized we weren't only witnesses, but also participants in a veiled form of human sacrifice. In recent years, the government has decreed that the spears be blunted, a move which Jago Pana claims makes the Posola more dangerous than before. Because it's more difficult to draw blood, there's a tendency to go for a kill. A young warrior has received a direct hit to the temple. Within an hour, he will be dead. It's by no means the end of the day's sport, but the essential sacrifice has been made. The planting season can now begin. The conflict between the forces of the upper and lower worlds has been resolved. For another year, the life cycles of this hidden valley can flow as before.
Lawrence and I had been on the road now for a long time, and we were ready for the bright lights. But a chance came along that we just couldn't resist. A free ride out beyond the Spice Islands to Indonesia's easternmost territory, the world's second largest and least explored island, New Guinea, where man still lives as he did 50,000 years ago. In its great southern swamps live the Asmat, the most feared headhunters of New Guinea. Missionaries living 2 days away down the coast had tried to dissuade us from venturing up this particular river. They seldom came this way, and no other Westerner had been here since, well, since Michael Rockefeller. And he never came back. So we weren't at all sure what sort of a welcome we'd get. We'd brought the obligatory black tobacco. Its arrival, if not ours, was cause for celebration. We'd decided it would be wise to dress correctly for the occasion. But we did draw the line at the shell nose piece. The tides flood this swamp every day, leaving no solid ground for 100 miles inland. It's a world of mud, without a single stone. The Asmat never knew a stone age. They still live in the age of wood. They call themselves the tree people. And like the trees, they draw effortlessly from the forest all they need, and no more. And their jungle is alive with game. We never went hungry, and we never found our diet boring. Unexpectedly tasty was the sago grub, larvae of the Capricorn beetle. Toasted live, it offers an explosion of rich, fatty protein. The crispy bit is the final crunch on its head. There is another of their delicacies which is more controversial. The Asmat are not only headhunters, they are cannibals. Bertaham makes no bones about it. He says it's some years since he tasted human flesh, but he still wears the bamboo knife he used to butcher his enemies with. One day, all the men took us deep into the swamp. They were looking for some very special trees. Before there were any humans, they told us, a god carved some poles. He drummed life into them. They danced and became the first Asmat, the tree people. They would now do the same with these trees, using the village's only steel axe. We returned triumphantly to the village with the slaughtered trees, but the women had their own reception planned. Their targets were the jungle spirits, which had to be driven from the trees to be replaced by the souls of 7 dead warriors, recently killed in a battle with a nearby village. was the first step in a ritual of revenge that should culminate with the anointing of the Poles with blood from the enemy village. Weeks were to pass before the Poles became the works of art that Western collectors vie for. It was these which had lured Michael Rockefeller, son of the American vice president, to his lonely fate in the Asmat swamps. Only much later would we learn that Rockefeller was almost definitely killed and eaten in this village. The villagers had had good reason. Before his arrival in 1961, in the last years of colonial government, a Dutch patrol had killed several of their important war leaders. For the first time, the white man had entered into the Asmat revenge cycle. And Michael Rockefeller found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. For weeks we watched as they carved and danced. They were in no hurry. Enemy spies were given plenty of warning about the impending revenge. It was all part of the etiquette of war. And they don't require an eye for every eye, nor a tooth for every tooth. There were 7 Poles for 7 dead warriors. In their revenge attack, they may take 10 heads, or only 1. Either way, the balance will have been re-established. War here, it turns out, is not too costly in lives. And it involves a code of honor that we haven't known in the West since the death of chivalry in the Middle Ages. Agop is one of their finest sculptors. But he too has been to the wars. Like all old campaigners, he enjoys showing off his battle scars. If you twist very fast as an arrow hits, he says, it won't enter properly, and you can pull it straight out. This one almost killed him. Basim village did it. Not Basim, someone says, or Manasep. But Agop says it's his nose, he should know.
Ini sudah.
After 2 months, the Poles were ready to stand and dance. The souls of the dead warriors occupying them would look down as reminders to the living of their duty to anoint them soon with the blood of their enemies. Perhaps our presence had altered the delicate balance here in some way. Would they now hesitate to fulfill the final act, I wondered, and risk the anger of the unavenged souls? A few stalwarts tried to convince the elements that they are still and will always be the untamed Asmat. All night the storm raged around the longhouse. Nobody slept. Their attempts at song were desultory. They were afraid. Afraid of the anger of the spirits, and for the first time we were afraid of them. Before dawn, the storm had gone, and so had we. Out into the Arafura Sea and down the coast to the mission post, 2 days' travel and 50,000 years away. There were 3 unexplored mountain ranges to find our way, not over, but through. Then there was the world's largest archipelago to be crossed, island hopping by whatever craft came our way. Travel in remote parts of Indonesia can call for patience. Especially when the plane you've been waiting a week for turns out to be full. Eventually we reached the island that all the world has heard of, Bali. Lying close to the heart of the archipelago, its name alone conjures up visions of the ideal tropical paradise. But with its international airport and luxury hotels, it was the one Indonesian island we'd always planned to avoid. But Bali cast its spell. It had been months since we'd seen Westerners, and it was a shock to realize how we must appear to the Indonesians. Offerings and the celebration of life. That was my first and my lasting impression of Bali. But almost immediately, the island began showing us its other faces. On a beach of black volcanic sand, we came across what we thought was going to be an entertainment. This was clearly one demon we were not expected to take too seriously. Then the mood changed. It was Rungda, they told us, mistress of the graveyard. We had walked unwittingly into a trance. We would later learn that the swords of the temple guardians were very real and very sharp. The man wearing Rungda's mask was protected only by a traditional cotton waistband and the power of his possession. Could this have been for real? I'm certain the audience thought so. Bali has thousands of temples, all celebrating a rich blend of Hindu Buddhism with lively overtones of island animism. The gods consume only the essence of these offerings, the love and care that goes into making them. Mortals can enjoy the material leftovers. There was food and entertainment here. There seemed no separation between life and religion. If the churches of my childhood had been more like this temple, I would have spent a lot more time in them. It was the way these people had shaped their island that fascinated Lawrence.
I couldn't get over how the place was such a co-production between people and the earth. Nobody really knows how many thousands of years it's taken the Balinese to sculpt their hills with water and rice. Above us rose the great volcano, Gunung Agung. They say it's the home of their gods, while the demons of the underworld live in the sea, and all mankind is balanced between them. We felt ourselves suspended in a kind of paradise, but we hadn't a clue how deeply we'd be drawn into it. One day a procession passed by, and we followed. They were returning to their temple with holy water from a sacred spring. We didn't know it then, but this village would become part of our lives. Pengo Second is a community of farmers and artists, bursting with creativity. Here we met Dewa Nyoman Batuan, a painter and enthusiastic innovator. He was experimenting with traditional batik designs for T-shirts at the time.
cukup untuk orang Bali ya.
He told us you don't need much in Bali.
Ada rumah kecil, jadi bisa melakukan upacara-upacara, misalnya upacara odalan itu bisa.
You need enough to eat and enough to make the necessary ritual offerings.
Makanan, rumah, pakaian.
Feeding the gods feeds your soul as well.
Jadi selama saya bergaul dengan dia,
Batuan was to become our closest friend in Pengosekan, and in many ways our teacher.
makanan rohani itu yang kedua. Sehingga itu ada hubungannya dengan perasaan saya.
They're not possessive about their art. And they even do a lot of their canvases together, unthinkable for a Western painter. Everybody paints what he does best, and the result is simply signed Pengosekan Group. But they also follow their own private muses. Dewa Putu Moko is Batuan's elder brother. He's the introvert of the community. He saves his eloquence for his paintings. In this one, a Hindu hero journeys into the underworld to search amongst the souls of the dead for his parents, his own ancestral identity. Batuan paints similar mythic subjects, but he's also fascinated by the changes Bali itself is experiencing. This one's of a major ceremony, held once every 100 years at the Mother Temple, high on the slopes of the great mountain. He was always interested in anything we could tell him of the outside world, and there was so much we could learn from him.
Maksud saya menanamkan tiga itu baik. Dan Dewa Batuan pernah bilang juga,
About a year after our first meeting, we found Batuan decorating his family shrine. That was the day he made us an offer which dramatically changed our lives. He suggested we might like to build a home on his land. He led us into an enchanted valley below his own house. It wasn't really his land anyway, he said. Only the gods can own land. We humans only borrow it for a while. For a wanderer, to be able to build a house anywhere seemed too good to be true. And now this, in Bali.
Coconut, which we have here, and bamboo, which is the weaving that's going beneath the roof. The roof itself is thatched with elephant grass, which grows all around these fields as well.
All we had to pay for were the raw materials and the village party, for the whole of Pengosekan helped us build it. No one was going to be left out. It's the way it's done here, with every villager putting a piece of himself into every house in the village, which helps bind the community together. There's a third level, a sleeping platform, open on 3 sides. It's like floating in the rice paddies, in perfect comfort. As time passed, it was very easy to settle into the rhythms of the village. On the holy days of Saraswati, goddess of knowledge and the arts, offerings are made to her instruments, which in our case are cameras and books. Offerings are made almost daily in our house, to deities who each have their season and meaning. It was my first experience of a place where the natural environment and the rhythms of human worship, work, play and art all seemed interwoven. The kids come to watch the artists painting in our house, and Batuan explains their meanings.
Itu semua kena, anak kecil, orang tua, orang kaya, orang miskin. Dan ada dua
Two
naga.
serpent dragons spin the world on its axis, the polarities.
Unsur Bima itu adalah bayu. Jadi naga di diri Bima itu ada
Everything has its opposite.
kehidupan.
Up and down,
Ini ada renang,
day and night,
ada malam, ada siang,
good and evil.
baik dan buruk.
If we can integrate these opposites, then we share the strength of both in our lives and our
Bobo dan
art.
Besuki itu kehidupan dan makanan.
Sometimes the girls of the village rehearse their temple dances in the house too. Their teacher is Batuan's niece, Putuwarti. She uses no mirrors. If the inner dance is right, she says, then it will show itself outwardly. When her students are asked to dance at one of the island's most important temples, the whole village turns out. The dancers are at their peak when they're about 11 years old. For the Balinese, it's the children who best reflect the heavenly dimension. But they never let you forget the other side of life. Ritual cockfighting is less a sport than a blood sacrifice to the demons of the underworld who also need their due. Enormous sums of money change hands in the gambling. No temple ceremony is complete without a cockfight, for the demons must be fed their food too, the emotions of fear, envy, and greed. Batuan insists we must stand with our feet equally planted in both worlds, the light and the dark. Only in this way can one have the full energy of consciousness. It was some time after the house was finished that Batuan and his family first took us on their annual pilgrimage to the mother temple of all Bali, high on the great volcano of Gunung Agung. It was drizzling with rain that evening, and the summit was hidden by clouds. We'd all been offered umbrellas, but Batuan had laughed and said, "Why bother? It's holy water." This was the first of the approaching monsoon rains. But we didn't mind anymore. We'd found a home.